At the family will reading, my sister said, she wasn't even invited, why is she here? My uncle snorted, probably needs a handout again. Then my niece said, Grandpa said you were always crying. Hours later, the maid came in with a torn envelope Dad left in the kitchen drawer. The first sentence made everyone gasp. It's funny how life can throw things at you when you least expect them. I never planned to return to the family estate after I left years ago, but when my father passed away, something pulled me back. The invitation to the will reading came, but it didn't come to me. It was addressed to everyone else in the family. It was like the final jab from a man who never quite knew how to love me properly, but maybe that was just his way of doing things. When I showed up anyway, my older sister, Amanda, gave me a cold look. My uncle Richard laughed it off with a snide comment. And then, just when things started to heat up, my niece Claire said something that cut through the air like a knife. Hours later, when everyone thought the situation had settled, the maid walked in with something that turned everything upside down. My father, even in death, had one last surprise waiting for us. The house still smelled the same, the familiar, dusty scent of old wood and lingering perfume, a smell that always seemed to remind me of childhood. I couldn't help but feel a knot in my stomach as I stood in the entrance hall. It had been years since I'd walked through those doors, and it felt as if nothing had changed, though everything had. The old house, the garden I used to run through, the rooms I spent so many sleepless nights in, all of it stood as a monument to my past. But I was no longer the little girl who had lived here, crushed under the weight of expectations and broken promises. I was someone else now. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open. The living room was exactly as I remembered, furniture arranged neatly, portraits of my family hanging on the walls, the warm glow of sunlight coming through the large bay windows. My father's taste had always been pristine, almost cold in its perfection. And now, in this room, I could feel the ghosts of the past whispering all around me. The will reading had drawn my sister, Amanda, my uncle Richard, his daughter Claire, and me. I wasn't invited, of course. No one had expected me to show up, but I couldn't bring myself to stay away. I wasn't sure if I was there to grieve, to settle old scores, or just to see if the weight of my father's death would finally give me some peace. But I came. And they didn't seem pleased about it. Amanda's eyes locked onto me as soon as I walked in. She didn't say anything right away, but I could tell by the way her lips tightened that she wasn't happy to see me. We hadn't been close for years, not since our teenage years when she had always made it clear that I was a disappointment to her. As we got older, we simply drifted apart. She married well, had children, and kept up appearances. She was the picture of success, or at least, that's how she liked to present herself. Richard, my uncle, was lounging in one of the chairs near the window. His fingers drummed idly on the armrest, and when he saw me, he let out a small, almost amused snort. "Look who finally decided to show up," he muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. His voice was thick with contempt, as always. He had a way of belittling everyone around him, like he was the only one who mattered. Claire, his daughter, was sitting next to him. She was barely a teenager, but she carried herself with a confidence I never had at her age. She could be sweet when she wanted to be, but her sharp tongue often made her more trouble than she was worth. Today was no exception. "You weren't even invited," she said without hesitation, her eyes narrowed, as if I were the one intruding on her territory. "Why are you here?" I stood still, unsure of how to respond. Was I supposed to apologize for being here? For existing? The harshness of her words stung, but I didn't let it show. The past few years had taught me that confrontation wasn't the answer. It was better to keep things calm and composed, no matter how much my insides were twisting. My gaze flicked to Amanda, who was still staring at me, her lips pursed tightly. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, resentment, perhaps. But there was more. There was an undercurrent of fear, a fear that something had changed, and it wasn't just about me being here. Something had shifted in the family dynamic, and no one knew exactly what it meant yet. "She's probably just here for the handout," Richard chuckled, half mocking me. "You know how she is. Always needing something." The words felt like a slap, but I didn't react. I had heard worse from him over the years. But there was something about the way he said it that made me want to retaliate. Instead, I held my tongue and sat down in a quiet corner, keeping to myself as the lawyer started setting up. The lawyer, Mr. Barnes, was an older man, one who had worked with my father for years. He adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and began to explain how things were going to unfold. But just as he was about to dive into the official reading, the door to the hallway opened, and the maid walked in holding a small, wrinkled envelope in her hand. Her presence was almost unnoticed at first, but the sight of the envelope, with its frayed edges and a worn seal, immediately caught everyone's attention. I knew that envelope. My father had been meticulous about his paperwork, and that one looked like it had been hiding in a drawer for years. "What's this?" Mr. Barnes asked, a bit startled by the interruption. The maid, who had worked for the family for over 2 decades, handed it to him wordlessly. She had been with us long enough that she knew how to keep her mouth shut and stay out of the drama. But even she looked a little uncomfortable as she left the room. The lawyer carefully opened the envelope, the quiet rustling of paper filling the otherwise tense silence. As he read, his expression shifted from neutral to one of surprise. The rest of us watched intently, each of us holding our breath, waiting for what would come next. He cleared his throat before reading aloud, but even his voice trembled slightly. "The following is a letter, dated 2 years ago, from your father." We all leaned in, eager to hear what was written. The letter, in stark contrast to the cold, formal language of the will itself, felt deeply personal. The words on the paper weren't just legal jargon, they were the final words of a man who had known how to keep everyone at arm's length. The first sentence made everyone gasp. "I have made my decision, and I leave everything to charity." The room was silent, except for the faint sound of gasps and quick intakes of breath. No one expected this. Not a single one of us. My father had always been about control, about power, about maintaining the appearance of a perfect family. To leave everything to a charity, to cut us all off, was an act of defiance that none of us had anticipated. And that was just the beginning of the letter. The lawyer continued to read aloud, his voice steady but a little less certain now, as he processed the words himself. My father's words echoed through the room, heavy and unexpected, like a thunderclap. "I have watched each of you for years," the lawyer read. "And in my final days, I came to realize something that should have been obvious to me much sooner, that family, as you all define it, has long since ceased to be a bond. It is merely a collection of people with their own agendas, using each other for convenience, for inheritance, for status, but never truly coming together." I could feel the eyes of my sister, uncle, and niece turning toward me, and I felt a deep, unsettling ache in my chest. I hadn't expected my father to say this in such harsh terms. I didn't think he would have cared enough to leave such a note. But now, as I listened to the words being read, it became clear that this wasn't just about me. This was about everything we had failed to be as a family. All the years of ignoring each other's pain, pushing each other to be something we weren't, pretending to care when the truth was so much darker. I looked up at the faces around me. Amanda, Richard, Claire, they were all stunned, each one processing this in their own way. Amanda's face, which had been so hard and judgmental earlier, was now pale, her lips trembling slightly. Richard, ever the cynic, had stopped laughing. His expression was unreadable, but I could tell he was having trouble hiding his shock. And Claire, sitting next to her father, had lost the smug smile she often wore. Now, she was just a confused teenager, trying to make sense of what her grandfather had just said about her own family. The lawyer continued, his voice trembling slightly as he read the final lines. "Therefore, I leave my estate, my fortune, and all that I have earned throughout my life to a charity I believe in. It is a charity that helps children from broken homes, children who have known abandonment and loss, children who have no one to protect them. I hope that through my small contribution, I can help undo some of the harm that has been caused by this family, by my actions, and by the actions of those before me." The room was still, a cold silence hanging in the air. I could hear the faint ticking of the old grandfather clock in the corner, the only sound in the entire room, as if even time itself was holding its breath. None of us spoke immediately. I wasn't sure if anyone could form the words to respond, to address the enormity of what had just been revealed. For years, we had all believed we were entitled to something, that my father's wealth and estate were ours by right. But in that moment, we all realized how wrong we had been. The lawyer placed the letter down on the table in front of him, looking at all of us with a somber expression. "This is the last message your father wanted to leave with you," he said softly. "And with that, the estate is now legally bound to be passed on to the charity. There are no further discussions or negotiations to be had." There was a long pause. The air in the room grew thick with tension. My sister was the first to break the silence. She stood up abruptly, knocking her chair over as she did. Her face was red with anger, and her hands were trembling. "What the hell is this?" she spat, her voice rising in a sharp, angry pitch. "This is insane. This is our inheritance. We're his family." Her eyes darted around the room, looking for support, for someone who would agree with her. But no one spoke. Richard, still sitting in his chair, didn't move. His face had softened from his usual smirk to something unreadable. He let out a long sigh, his eyes flicking from Amanda to the lawyer. "Well, isn't this a surprise? We're all getting screwed. What's next, then? Are we just supposed to thank him for his generosity?" Claire, who had been silent up until now, spoke in a voice much quieter than usual. But Grandpa wanted to help people like us, didn't he?" Her words were hesitant, and I could see that she was struggling to reconcile her image of her grandfather with the man who had just passed away. She had never known him as anything other than a distant figure, a man who never really seemed to care much about her. The lawyer cleared his throat, his eyes avoiding all of us as he spoke, as though he couldn't quite meet our gazes after reading the letter. "Your father, he felt strongly about this. He believed this was the right decision. And honestly, the money is already being transferred to the charity. There's nothing left for me to say. It's final." Amanda's face twisted into a sneer, her nostrils flaring with anger. "You can't just do this," she said, her voice rising with each word. "He was supposed to leave something for us. He was supposed to take care of his family. Not some random charity." She turned to me, and suddenly, it was as if all the years of resentment she had buried under the surface came flooding out. "And you? You weren't even invited here. What are you trying to prove by showing up? Just to get your hands on whatever's left?" Her words cut deep, but I wasn't about to let her see how much it hurt. I had been the black sheep of the family for as long as I could remember, always the odd one out. But now, in the wake of my father's will, I realized that none of us had truly been a family for a long time. We had all been in it for ourselves. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I turned to the lawyer, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, as I tried to process the weight of the situation. I needed to find my words, but they weren't coming easily. After a long, painful silence, the maid returned. She entered the room without a word, holding a small, folded paper. Her eyes flickered nervously to the lawyer, and then to the rest of us. She looked out of place, like she was stepping into a storm that didn't belong to her. The lawyer took the paper from her hand. It was another note, but this one was much smaller, more personal. Without saying anything, he unfolded it and read aloud again, his voice barely above a whisper. "I have no regrets about my decisions. You have all been given the tools to live your lives as you see fit. But it's clear now that you have misunderstood the meaning of family. It's not about blood or money. It's about how you treat one another when no one is watching. I hope one day you will understand that." That last sentence hung in the air like a hammer waiting to fall. I didn't know how to respond to that. The words weren't meant for me specifically, but it felt like my father had aimed them directly at each of us. Every one of us had failed to live up to some ideal, some idea of what family should be. And now, with his final act, he had made sure we couldn't ignore it any longer. The room remained silent. We were all staring at each other, as if we expected someone to fix this, to undo what had been done. But there was no fixing it. My father's decisions were final. His message had been sent, loud and clear. I glanced at my family, my sister, my uncle, my niece, and felt a strange sense of finality in my chest. My father was gone. The inheritance he had promised us didn't matter anymore. What mattered was what we did next, how we carried on, and whether any of us could move past the walls we had built up around ourselves. And that was the hardest part to swallow. The room remained frozen, the weight of my father's final words hanging in the air like an inescapable fog. No one spoke, not for a long time. My father's decision, his rejection of all of us, had left an aching silence in its wake. But as the minutes passed, a strange sense of clarity began to form within me. It wasn't just the absence of wealth or the charity that made my chest tighten. It was the realization that my father had, in his own way, revealed something about each of us, our flaws, our fractured bonds, and he had done it without leaving a single penny for us to fight over. I was the first to break the silence. "Are we done here?" I asked quietly, my voice betraying none of the anger that was bubbling up inside me. I stood, my hands steady at my sides. I didn't want to be a part of this any longer. It felt beneath me now. The lawyer looked at me, his face showing a mixture of sympathy and exhaustion. "I believe that concludes the reading," he said, his voice weary. "Unless there's anything else." Amanda, still seething with disbelief, opened her mouth to say something. But I raised my hand, cutting her off. There was no need to continue the fight. None of us had any claim to anything anymore. "I'm leaving," I said, turning toward the door. "I don't think I can sit through this any longer." Richard, who had been unusually quiet since the letter was read, finally spoke up. "You're just going to leave?" he asked, a hint of mockery in his tone. I didn't turn around. "Yes. You know, I think I've had enough of this, family." I could feel their eyes on me, but I didn't care anymore. I didn't need their approval. I never had, and for the first time, it didn't hurt to accept that reality. I wasn't going to stick around for their drama, their accusations, or their bitterness. But as I made my way toward the front door, I realized something. This wasn't just about money or revenge. It was about my own personal growth, about how far I'd come from the girl who used to beg for attention and validation from people who never truly cared. I was done seeking approval. I was done being the outsider, the scapegoat, the one left out. I had my own life to live now, and I wasn't going to let anyone hold me back. Just as I reached the door, I heard Amanda's voice rise again, more desperate this time. "Wait, are you just going to leave like this? You don't get to walk out of here with nothing. You don't get to walk out with the last word." I paused, my hand on the doorknob, and turned slowly to face her. Her face was flushed with anger, her eyes wild. It was a look I had seen countless times in the past, a look of entitlement, of someone who believed she was owed something. "You know," I said calmly, looking her directly in the eyes, "this whole time, I thought I needed your approval. That I needed to be part of your perfect little family. But the truth is, Amanda, I've already been living without it. And honestly, it feels better." She opened her mouth, but no words came out. It was as if I had ripped the floor out from under her. I didn't wait for her to respond. I opened the door and stepped out, closing it quietly behind me. The sound of silence followed me as I made my way down the front steps. I didn't know where I was going, but I didn't care. I wasn't running away from anything. I was running toward something new. Something better. As I reached my car, I was about to open the door when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to see Claire, my niece, walking toward me. She was holding something in her hand, and her expression was no longer the confident smirk it had been earlier. She looked uncertain, almost vulnerable. "You're leaving, aren't you?" she asked quietly, her voice lacking the usual snark. "You don't want to stay and fight for what's yours?" I shook my head, feeling a strange peace wash over me. "I don't want anything from them anymore, Claire. Not their money, not their approval. I'm just done." She hesitated, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite place. Then, she held out the small object in her hand. It was a folded-up letter, no bigger than a piece of scrap paper. I took it from her, confused. "What is this?" I asked. "It's from Grandpa," Claire said, her voice quiet. "I found it a while ago. It's for you." I opened the letter slowly, my hands shaking slightly. It wasn't long, just a few lines of carefully written words. "I've always admired your strength, even when you didn't realize it. You've carried so much for so long, and you've done it with grace. I hope one day you'll understand that the things we fought for, money, approval, don't matter as much as the way we treat each other. I'm sorry for not being the father you deserved. But I know you'll be okay. I trust you to make the right choices." I felt the tears rise in my eyes, but I held them back. I hadn't expected this, hadn't expected my father, in his last moments, to leave me something so personal. So real. Claire watched me carefully as I folded the letter back up and slipped it into my pocket. "I think he wanted you to have that," she said quietly, her eyes still searching mine. "Maybe it's not too late to fix things, with all of us." I didn't respond right away. I could feel the weight of the years, the hurt, the pain from everything that had happened. But I also felt something else, something lighter, something freer. Maybe fixing things with the family was never going to be an option. Maybe the best thing I could do was let go of the need for them to be what I wanted them to be. Maybe it was time to finally stop carrying the weight of their expectations. "Maybe," I said softly, looking out toward the horizon, "but that's something I'll figure out on my own." Claire seemed to understand, her expression softening as she nodded. I gave her a small smile and turned to get into my car. The road ahead was uncertain, but I was no longer afraid of it. Whatever happened, I had made peace with myself. And as I drove away from the family estate, I realized that for the first time in my life, I wasn't running away from something, I was running toward my own future. And in that, I found a kind of victory that was sweeter than anything money or revenge could ever offer.